You heard the title, Giants of Tartaria, Expedition Archives of the 1800s, Why the Notes Survived but Not the Facts. And now the question is simple. Why did they write as if they were afraid to say it out loud? Imagine an expedition in the 1800s. People walk into remote places where maps show almost nothing. They measure ruins, make sketches, and file reports. And then, in their notes, strange details appear. Doorways that are too tall for a normal person. Stairways with steps that don't match a human stride. Tool marks that look like they were made by a hand 1.5 to 2 times bigger than ours. But here's the most unsettling part. They almost never say it directly. Instead of, "we saw it," they write, "locals claim." Instead of, "this is a fact," they write, "there are hints." Instead of names and exact locations, they use blurry wording, like someone warned them, "don't go further." Why? Because if those notes are true, it means there's a missing piece of history, and we were never shown the whole picture. And if only the hints survived in the archives, then where did the facts go? So, tell me honestly, did the 1800s expeditions really find nothing? Or were they simply not allowed to write the truth? So, you stayed. Good. Because what I'm about to show you isn't a theory, it's paper, ink, handwriting pressed into pages more than 150 years ago. And here's the thing about paper. It doesn't argue. It doesn't defend itself. It just sits there, quiet, patient, waiting for someone to read it. Let me take you somewhere specific. St. Petersburg, 1873. A government archive building. Stone walls, high ceilings that swallow sound. A cold hush that makes every footstep feel too loud. The air smells like dust, old leather, and time that never fully leaves the room. Inside a reinforced cabinet, locked, catalogued, forgotten, there's a field. Journal bound in faded green cloth. Expedition notes from Central Asia. On the surface, it's standard work. Distances measured, rivers crossed, supplies counted, the dry rhythm of official documentation. And then you reach page 47. The handwriting changes. It gets smaller, tighter, cramped, like the author suddenly started writing faster, or started trying to be less visible, as if the words mattered more than the neatness, as if someone might read over his shoulder. One entry reads, "The locals speak of builders who could not pass through their own doorways. When asked to explain, they fall silent. When pressed, they point to the ruins and say only, 'Not for us, never for us.'" Now, here's the first red flag. The official survey report from that same expedition makes no mention of this. Not a hint, not a footnote. Nothing about ruins, nothing about doorways, nothing about locals refusing to talk. And that's where it stops feeling like a simple odd detail. Because this exact kind of sentence shows up again. A German geological survey, 1881. Different continent, different language, different archive, different bureaucracy, different handwriting. And yet, the phrasing lands in the same place. Structures unsuited to the human frame, doorways of unusual height. The native population attributes these to the tall ones who came before. Coincidence? Maybe. But then I found a third account, British India, 1869. A military cartographer's private journal, never published, never filed, buried in an estate sale like it was worthless. The kind of book that only survives because somebody didn't bother to throw it away. Same hesitation, same pattern, same strange simplicity. Too tall for doors, 3 expeditions, 3 decades, 3 languages, and they all describe the same thing. Using words so similar, it's hard not to wonder if they were copying a single source. But the journals don't reference each other, the official records don't connect them. And on paper, these expeditions found nothing unusual. So, how do 3 separate teams stumble into the same kind of sentence, and then officially pretend it never existed? Now, look closer at the St. Petersburg Journal. Page 48. There's a sketch. Rough, fast, not meant for display, just a doorway with measurement marks along the side. The proportions suggest an opening roughly 9 feet tall, maybe more. Not a decorative arch, not a cathedral entry. A doorway drawn like something practical, something someone was meant to walk through. Beside it, in the margin, a single word, standartny, a Ukrainian word for standard. Standard for whom? The sketch has a fold mark, not a natural bend from age, an intentional crease. Like someone once removed that page from the binding, flattened it somewhere else, and then put it back when they were done with it. And when the ink is examined, under magnification, something else appears, faint pencil marks beneath the ink. An earlier draft, an earlier measurement, the original number was higher. Someone corrected it, not to fix a mistake, to reduce it, to make the doorway smaller on paper than it was in the first draft. I'm not claiming these explorers saw giants walking around. I'm saying something simpler, and, in a way, more unsettling. These were trained surveyors, people whose job was to measure the real world accurately and report it in clean, boring numbers. And yet, here they are, across different empires, writing descriptions that don't fit normal human architecture, then wrapping those descriptions in careful, cautious language. Locals claim. It is said. There are indications. Never. We measured it ourselves, and here are the numbers. Almost as if they were allowed to record the idea, but not allowed to confirm it. As if the rule was document it, but don't stamp it with its certainty. Describe it, but don't finish the thought. And here's the detail that keeps me awake. In the St. Petersburg Archive catalog, the Green Journal is listed as complete. But the page numbers jump from 49 to 53. 3 pages, missing. The binding shows no tear marks, no damage, no ragged edges where paper was ripped out in panic. Those pages weren't destroyed. They were removed cleanly, professionally. That means someone had time, someone had tools, someone had access, someone who knew exactly which pages to take and how to take them without leaving a mess. The catalog was last updated in 1991. The pages were already gone. So I have to ask you plainly, if those expeditions found nothing worth hiding, then what was on pages 50, 51, and 52? In the next chapter, we look at something you can't quietly cut out of a book and pretend it never existed. Photographs, old glass plots, images that show shadows too long for, the people casting them, and a face that someone tried to paint over, but not quite well enough. Photographs don't lie. That's what they taught us. A camera captures light. It doesn't think. It doesn't add drama. It doesn't polish the story. It just records whatever stood in front of the lens at that moment. So, what happens when a photograph records something that shouldn't be there? Vienna. 1887. A private collection surfaces at an estate auction. Mixed among ordinary antiques is a wooden box containing 14 glass plate negatives, expedition photographs, each labeled in faded ink. Samarkand Survey, 1882. Most of the plates are plain, ruins, archways, dusty streets. Teams of men posed beside tripods and measuring rods, trying to look serious for the record. But plate number 9 is different. The image shows a stone gateway, massive, heavy, built like it was meant to outlast the people around it. The arch rises so high, it nearly escapes the frame. In the foreground, 3 expedition members stand near the base, placed there like a ruler for scale, and behind them, there's a shadow. Not their shadow, someone else's. It stretches in from outside the frame, cutting across the ground at an angle. The light direction is clear because the men in the gateway cast their own shadows too, and those shadows follow the same sun, which means this 4th shadow has to follow the same rules. Based on its length and angle, the figure casting it would have been roughly 12 feet tall. The official explanations came fast, as they always do. A trick of perspective, a palm tree, a flagpost caught at an odd moment. But when the negative is examined closely, the shadow has feet. 2 clear shapes at the base, with a break between them. Not a trunk, not a pole, not a blur. Feet. A person-shaped shadow. Now, here's where it gets worse. The auction catalog from 1887 lists the collection as 14 plates, but the current holder, a university archive in Munich, lists 13. Plate number 9 is noted in the records with a calm, harmless line. Removed for restoration. Date unknown. It never came back. And that matters, because this isn't the only time the same kind of accident shows up. I found a second photograph. Different expedition, different continent, same problem. Cairo, 1874. A French archaeological team documents a site near the Step Pyramid. One image shows workers standing beside a partially excavated doorway. The proportions are already strange. The door frame towers above them in a way that doesn't feel like simple decoration or grand design. It feels oversized in a practical way, like it was built for bodies that weren't shaped like theirs. But look at the right edge of the photograph. A shadow enters the frame. Long, sharp, angled. The source is cut off, standing outside the boundary of the image, just beyond what the camera captured. The expedition leader mentions that plate only once in his notes. Just a single sentence. Plate discarded due to processing error, light contamination. Yet, the plate survived. It sits in a private collection in Lyon. And the so-called light contamination is not a flare, not a chemical streak, not a foggy patch. It's a shadow that matches no object visible anywhere in the photograph. When asked about the image in 1912, the expedition leader's widow said only, "He never spoke of Saqqara after he returned, not once." 2 photographs, 2 expeditions, 2 shadows that don't belong to anyone inside the frame. And both images suggest the same thing. Someone stood just outside the shot, close enough to cast a shadow into the scene, tall enough to make the men in the picture look small by comparison. After the second time, coincidence stops feeling like a real answer. It starts feeling like a way to stop thinking. Now, consider what ties these 2 images together. Both were almost lost. One was removed for restoration. One was discarded due to error. Both explanations sound clean, official, and boring, the kind of language that closes a case. And yet, both plates survived, barely, drifting into private hands instead of sitting safely inside public archives. Almost like someone tried to erase them, and almost succeeded. The expeditions measured the ruins. They sketched the arches. They wrote careful notes about unusual proportions and doorways that didn't match the human frame, but they didn't photograph what made those proportions so strange. Or did they? And then tried to make sure the clearest evidence never stayed in one place long enough to become real? In the next chapter, we stop staring at shadows. We start measuring doors, because stone doesn't lie either. And when the numbers show up, plain, cold, and hard to argue with, they become very difficult to explain away. Shadows can be argued away. Angles, light, a lucky coincidence at the edge of a frame, but stone doesn't play those games. Stone just sits there, heavy, silent, honest in the simplest way. You can measure it, you can calculate it, you can stand a person next to it and see the mismatch with your own eyes. You can't debate a doorway that doesn't fit. Let me show you what I mean. Onni, Eastern Turkey, 1892. A Russian archaeological team arrives to survey the abandoned medieval city, a place that once held thousands of lives, churches, palaces, merchant houses, streets that used to carry noise and trade and prayer. Now it's empty. Wind and broken windows, grass and cracked stone, silence that feels too large for a city. The team measures everything: wall thickness, window placement, floor dimensions, standard procedure, neat lines on paper, clean figures, no drama, and then they reach the doorways. The expedition journal notes principal entrances consistently exceed 280 centimeters in height. Secondary passages average 240 centimeters. Purpose of such dimensions remains unclear given regional population characteristics. 280 centimeters, that's more than 9 feet, for a door. Now think about the people who live there. The average height of a man in that region during that period was around 165 centimeters, about 5'5". So why build entrances nearly twice that height? Not one grand gate for a ceremony. Not a single monument meant to impress strangers. Doors, daily doors. The kind people pass through 100 times without thinking. The official explanations are predictable: ventilation, status, aesthetic preference, words that sound tidy because they don't force anyone to look closer. But the expedition leader writes something different in private correspondence. A letter to a colleague in Moscow, not meant for publication, not meant for the archive catalog. He writes, "The wear patterns trouble me. The stone is polished smooth at 2 distinct heights, one at our shoulder level, one nearly a meter above our heads, as if 2 different populations use these passages. Two distinct heights, two different patterns of wear, as if the stone remembers two different bodies brushing past it, year after year, until rough edges became smooth. That observation never appears in his official paper. It stays in the private letter. Same year, different continent. A British survey team documents structures in Rajasthan, India, ancient stepwells, temple complexes, administrative buildings left behind by dynasties that disappeared long before any modern census or blueprint. Their numbers tell the same story. Doorways range from 270 to 300 centimeters. Stair risers measure 35 to 45 centimeters, nearly double what feels natural for a human step. Ceiling heights in primary chambers climb past 4 meters. A surveyor writes in his field notes, "The architecture suggests either extreme impracticality or accommodation for users of unusual stature. The latter explanation is not one I am prepared to commit to official record." Not prepared to commit. He saw the figures. He took the measurements. He understood what those numbers were pointing toward, and then he stopped, right at the edge of the obvious conclusion. He wouldn't write it down where it would become real. Here's what makes this pattern impossible to ignore. I cross-referenced measurements from 11 different expeditions: Russian, British, German, French, Ottoman, spanning 4 decades and 3 continents. And the numbers don't scatter randomly, they cluster. Door heights, 250 to 310 centimeters. Stair risers, 30 to 50 centimeters. Corridor widths, 180 to 220 centimeters. Wide enough for 2 large figures to pass side by side, without turning their shoulders. These aren't one-off oddities. They're consistent, almost standardized, as if someone, somewhere, built to a set of specifications meant for bodies larger than ours. The expeditions recorded the measurements. They filed them in reports. They copied them into charts. They drew them into sketches. They even admitted in margins and private letters that the proportions didn't fit regional population characteristics. But in official publications, not one of them asks the obvious question: who were these buildings made for? Instead, the reports reach for safe language, ceremonial purposes, symbolic grandeur, ventilation requirements, explanations that sound complete but explain nothing. The stones remember what the records refuse to say. And in the next chapter, the hints stop being hints. Because at some point, someone writes down exactly what they saw. And then, those pages go missing. Shadows that don't match. But the thing I keep coming back to isn't the stone or the glass plates. It's the language. Not what these expeditions said, what they refused to say. Every report, every journal, every letter, same pattern, same careful, quiet sidestep. Words arranged like a fence. Close enough to acknowledge something, never close enough to pin it down. They never write, "We saw this." They write, "Locals claim." They never write, "This is what we found." They write, "There are indications." They never give names, exact locations, precise coordinates. They write, "A site in the eastern region, ruins near the old trade route, structures of uncertain origin, blurry, vague, soft around the edges, not by accident." Almost as if they were told, "You may mention it, but you must not confirm it. You may describe it, but you must not locate it. Let me show you what I mean." St. Petersburg. 1886. A geological expedition returns from Central Asia. The team leader submits his official report to the Imperial Geographical Society. 47 pages. Detailed, professional, the kind of writing that looks safe enough to stamp and shelve. Then, on page 31, you find a single paragraph. The local population maintains persistent traditions regarding former inhabitants of unusual physical characteristics. These accounts, while widespread, cannot be independently verified, and are therefore noted only for ethnographic completeness. That's it, noted only for ethnographic completeness. One polite paragraph that closes the door the moment it opens. But the same team leader's personal journal, donated to a university archive decades later, tells a different story. He writes, "The elders showed us carvings, handprints pressed into clay. I measured one myself. The span exceeded 30 centimeters. Boria made a sketch, but I asked him to remove it from the official materials. Some things are better left unrecorded. Some things are better left unrecorded. He measured it. His assistant sketched it. and then he ordered it removed. Why? Because a handprint 30 centimeters wide isn't a folktale, it's a physical trace. And a hand that wide suggests a body built on a different scale, close to twice what you'd expect from an average person. That's not the kind of detail you put in an official report if you want to keep your position, your reputation, your funding, and your access to the next expedition. And this is where the pattern stops looking like coincidence. I've examined 19 expedition journals from this period. 14 contain passages that were later edited, crossed out, cut away, torn from bindings with a kind of neatness that feels practiced. In one German survey from 1879, an entire section is blacked out with ink. Beneath that ink, when viewed under infrared light, fragments remain visible. The bones recovered from the lower chamber, measured. And then the sentence disappears into darkness. In a British report from 1883, pages 17 through 20 are missing. The binding shows clean cuts, not tearing, not decay. The kind of removal you do with a steady hand and a sharp blade. In a French archaeological journal from 1891, a marginal note reads, "Transferred to restricted collection per ministry directive, not for publication." Restricted collection, ministry directive, not for publication. These weren't accidents, not fires, not floods, not careless archivists misplacing a page. Someone went through these documents. Someone identified the exact pages, the exact paragraphs, the exact sentences that said too much, and removed them. What survives are the safe traces, the vague references, the careful locals claim, the polite distancing words. But the hard parts, the numbers, the sketches, the names, the coordinates, gone. And that leaves one question you can't avoid. If this was nothing, if the expeditions truly found nothing unusual, then why did someone work so hard to make sure we'd never see the details? In the next chapter, we look at something that shouldn't exist at all. The same symbol, the same mark. Showing up on expedition crates, archive seals, and restricted folders, across different empires, different decades, different continents, as if someone was coordinating all of this from the very beginning. Coincidences happen, patterns can repeat by accident. Similar shapes can show up in different places because humans tend to think in similar lines. I told myself that for a long time. Then I found the mark. London, 1903. A retired colonial administrator dies and his estate is liquidated. Among the items listed for sale, 3 wooden crates, still sealed, containing materials from an 1876 survey expedition to Afghanistan. The crates are opened for the first time in 27 years. Inside, maps, geological samples, and a leather satchel filled with expedition papers. Routine, practical materials, the kind of cargo that usually disappears into storage without anyone asking questions. Except for one detail. On each crate, burned into the wood, a symbol. A circle with 3 short lines radiating from the center. Like a simplified sun. Or a wheel with 3 broken spokes. It isn't decorative. It's placed where a worker would see it first, like an instruction, not an ornament. The auction house catalogs it as expedition marking, origin unknown. I almost moved past it. Then I saw the same mark again. Munich, 1911. A collection of Ottoman survey documents surfaces in a private sale. Maps from expeditions to eastern Anatolia, dated 1868 to 1874. The papers are bound in folders, stacked tight, edges worn from handling. On the cover of each folder, the same symbol, same circle, same 3 lines, same proportions, like it came from the same template. The seller's notes call it classification markings of uncertain administrative origin. Uncertain origin, 2 empires, 2 decades apart, the same mark. So I started looking harder, and the mark kept showing up in places it had no right to be. St. Petersburg, a shipping manifest from 1882, crates bound for the Imperial Museum, contents listed as archaeological materials, restricted access. In the margin, stamped in red ink, the symbol, Paris, a telegram from 1889, intercepted and preserved in a diplomatic archive. The message discusses items recovered from the Algerian survey. At the bottom, added by hand, the symbol, Calcutta. An inventory log from 1894. Materials transferred from a British expedition to a special repository, London. Each entry initialed with the symbol, repeated like a quiet signature. 5 countries, 4 decades, the same. 3-line circle appearing on crates, documents, and correspondence tied to expeditions. And not once does anyone explain it. It isn't mentioned by name. It isn't defined in a key. It isn't listed in any legend, index, or administrative handbook. The mark exists on the materials, but it doesn't exist in the records that are supposed to describe those materials. And that's what makes it unsettling. These expeditions were not partners. They were rivals. British and Russian surveyors competed for influence across Central Asia. French and German teams fought over archaeological claims in the Middle East. Ottoman officials trusted no one, and no one trusted them back. Yet when certain items changed hands, when certain crates were sealed, when certain folders were bound, when certain reports were moved out of view, the same classification appeared, the same symbol, the same quiet removal from public access. That doesn't happen by accident, not across borders, not across decades, not across institutions that dislike each other. I found one reference to it, only one, a personal letter from a German archivist written in 1897. He complains to a colleague about a request from the Commission to transfer certain expedition materials into a shared repository. He writes, "They use the old mark as if that grants them authority over collections they did not fund and do not own. The old mark, as if it predates the expeditions themselves." He never names the Commission. He never lists members. He never explains how an international body could pressure a German institution into surrendering materials it paid for, cataloged and housed. But the tone tells you something. This was not a request he felt free to refuse. The letter ends with a line I can't forget. "I have complied. One does not argue with the circle. One does not argue with the circle. I promised you we'd assemble this like a puzzle, piece by piece." So here's what we have now. Expeditions that recorded things they couldn't explain. Photographs that caught shadows they couldn't label. Measurements that suggest buildings made for someone other than us. Documents edited so the specifics vanish. And now, a symbol that links them all. A single mark appearing again and again across different empires, different decades, different continents, always near the same kinds of materials, always near the same kind of silence. In the next chapter, we follow the expeditions themselves, the routes, the dates, the names, and we discover the pattern isn't random, it's a chain. A symbol means nothing without context. A mark burned into a crate is just a mark, until you trace where the crates went, who touched them, and what disappeared along the way. So I did. I pulled expedition records from 5 archives: British, Russian, German, French, and Ottoman. I cross-referenced dates, routes, and personnel lists. I compared official reports to private letters. I looked for the gaps as much as the facts. And that's when the chain appeared. It starts in 1867. A Russian mineralogical survey travels to the Altai Mountains, remote, barely mapped on the charts of the time. The team spends 3 months documenting rock formations, river systems, and mineral seams, exactly what a mineralogical survey is supposed to do. Their official report mentions nothing unusual, but the expedition leader requests an immediate follow-up mission. That is not normal for a mineralogical survey, not an optional extension, not next season, immediate, urgent. And the request is approved within 2 weeks, faster than any imperial bureaucracy should move, especially for something described as routine science. The second expedition departs in 1868, different team, same region. This time the mission is classified as geographical reconnaissance. No report survives. Now watch what happens next. A British cartographic mission travels to northern India. Their stated route passes through Kashmir, then veers unexpectedly toward the Hindu Kush. The original mission plan shows no clear reason for the detour, no mapped objective, no stated target, just a sudden change in direction that looks like an afterthought, unless you know where to look. And in the expedition leader's personal letters, there's a line that doesn't belong in a simple mapping mission. Correspondence from continental colleagues regarding sites of mutual interest. Continental colleagues. A British officer coordinating with someone in Europe about sites deep in Central Asia, while the official paperwork pretends this is ordinary surveying. 1 year later, 1870. A German archaeological team arrives in Persia. Their stated purpose is clean and respectable, documenting Achaemenid ruins. Standard academic work. The kind of expedition that wins grants and polite applause. But their actual route takes them far from known Achaemenid sites. They spend 6 weeks in a region their own maps label unexplored. Then something happens that gets filed away like a footnote. The team's photographer dies during the expedition. Official cause: fever. His equipment is shipped back to Berlin. The photographs are never developed. The plates are later listed as damage in transit. And that is where the pattern stops feeling like a set of bad coincidences and starts feeling like a system. Every time, every expedition, the same rhythm. A team travels to a region. They record what they can. They encounter something that doesn't fit the expected story. Then one of two things follows. They request a follow-up mission at unnatural speed, or they quietly share information with teams from other countries. And the materials, maps, plates, notes, get classified, lost, damaged, or locked away. Then the symbol appears on whatever remains. So I mapped the routes. I plotted them on a single chart and adjusted for the different years and the shifting borders. They converge. Not perfectly. Not on a single dot you can circle with a pin. They converge on a corridor, a belt stretching from eastern Turkey through Persia, into Central Asia and up towards southern Siberia. The same broad region old maps labeled Tartaria. 17 expeditions between 1867 and 1891. 5 different empires, all of them moving through that corridor. All of them producing reports with missing pages, edited passages, or restricted classifications. And then I found the detail that stopped me cold. The expedition leaders knew each other, not as rumors, not as a vague maybe, as documented fact. I found letters, conference attendance lists, shared memberships in geographical societies, names appearing together in the same rooms, the same committees, the same circles that decided what counted as knowledge and what counted as nonsense. These weren't isolated. Missions stumbling onto the same mysteries by accident. They were connected, coordinated, passing information through back channels while their official reports stayed clean and empty. One letter, dated 1884, from a British surveyor to a German archaeologist reads, "Your findings align with what we observed in 71. The Commission has requested we refrain from public discussion until the matter is better understood." The Commission. The same unnamed body the German archivist mentioned. The same authority tied to the old mark. The same quiet force that can make pages vanish and crates move without explanation. They knew. All of them knew. And they agreed, or were compelled, to stay silent. So, the chain isn't coincidence, it's coordination. And in the next chapter, we stop talking about roots and hints and missing pages. We look at what they actually measured, the numbers, the dimensions that repeat across different cities, different ruins, different continents, numbers that suggest someone built to a standard not meant for us. Coordination can be denied, symbols can be waved off as coincidence, letters can be dismissed as forgery or rumor. But numbers don't work like that. Numbers don't flatter. They don't drift to match a story. They sit on the page and refuse to move. And when I pulled the measurements together, the same figures kept showing up, again and again, across places that should have nothing in common. Let me show you. I collected architectural measurements from expedition reports spanning 3 decades. Doorway heights, stair dimensions, corridor widths, ceiling clearances. Different teams, different empires, different languages, and yet the same ranges kept repeating, as if someone had built from a shared template. Start with the doors. Ani, Turkey. 1892. Principal doorways. 280 to 295 centimeters. Samarkand, Uzbekistan. 1876. Palace entrances. 285 to 300 centimeters. Rajasthan, India, 1881, temple gateways, 275 to 290 centimeters. Persepolis, Persia, 1873, ceremonial passages, 290 to 310 centimeters. 4 locations, 4 different cultures. built across different centuries, under different rulers, with different building traditions. Yet the doorway heights cluster inside a narrow band, about 15 centimeters. That's not what random variation looks like. That looks like a specification. Now look at the stairs. Ani, stair risers, 38 to 42 centimeters. Samarkand, stair risers, 35 to 44 centimeters. Rajasthan, stair risers, 40 to 48 centimeters. Persepolis, stair risers, 36 to 45 centimeters. A comfortable human stair riser is roughly 17 to 20 centimeters. These risers are about double that. Not once, not as a grand ceremonial step built for show, consistently across different sites, across different regions. One German surveyor noted in 1879, ascending the main staircase requires a stride wholly unsuited to normal locomotion. Each step demands a climbing motion rather than a walking one. A climbing motion. Because those stairs weren't designed for normal walking. Not for the kind of walking a human body naturally falls into when it moves through a daily space. Now the corridors. I found width measurements from 7 different sites. The range is 180 to 230 centimeters. Wide enough for 2 large figures to pass comfortably side by side without turning their shoulders. One Russian report from 1884 observes, the passage widths suggest accommodation for traffic of considerable bulk. The wear patterns on opposing walls occur at identical heights, approximately 140 centimeters from the floor, as if occupants of similar dimensions routinely brushed against the stone. Similar dimensions, identical heights, routine contact. He's not describing one visitor. He's describing repeated movement over time by bodies that had the same scale, bodies that touched the walls often enough to polish stone. And that wear height does not match normal human shoulders. So, what do the numbers actually tell us? If you designed a building for someone 2.5 to 3 meters tall, roughly 8 to 10 feet, you would need doorways around 280 to 310 centimeters. You would need stair risers around 35 to 45 centimeters. You would likely build corridors around 180 to 230 centimeters to avoid constant bottlenecks, which is exactly what the expeditions measured across different empires, different architectural traditions, different supposed time periods, the same standard. One British architect, reviewing expedition data in 1896, wrote privately to a colleague, "The consistency is inexplicable by conventional theory. Either we propose a unified building code spanning cultures with no known contact, or we consider an alternative explanation I am not at liberty to publish." Not at liberty to publish. He saw the pattern. He understood what it implied, and he kept it out of the official record, where it might force someone to ask the wrong question in the wrong room. And here's the strangest part. These measurements weren't buried in one secret vault. They weren't locked behind a single gate. They're sitting in ordinary expedition reports, gathering dust in archives across Europe and beyond. Anyone could find them, but no one assembled them. No one laid them side by side. No one asked why buildings on 3 continents were built to nearly identical specifications, specifications that do not match the people who supposedly built them. Until now. In the next chapter, we move beyond doorways and stairs. We look at what the expeditions found inside these structures, the acoustic chambers, the resonant spaces, the strange interior geometry, features that don't feel like decoration, and the bells that weren't just bells. Architecture designed not only for different bodies, but for different capabilities. Measurements tell us size, proportions tell us scale, but architecture tells us something deeper. It tells us purpose. And the purpose of these buildings doesn't make sense, at least not if ordinary humans built them for ordinary daily use. Let me explain. Tbilisi, 1888. A Russian engineering team surveys older structures across the Caucasus. Churches, fortresses, administrative buildings left behind by empires that collapsed and were replaced over and over until the paperwork forgot the first builders. One engineer's journal contains a detail that shouldn't be possible to ignore. The window placements defy practical explanation. In the main hall, the lowest windowsill sits 3.2 meters from the floor. A man would require a ladder merely to look outside. 3.2 meters, roughly 10 feet, for a windowsill. He continues. More curiously, the interior walls contain niches at regular intervals, too shallow for storage, too high for seating. Their function remains entirely obscure. Niches carved into stone, repeated like a rhythm, too shallow to hold anything useful, too high to sit on, placed where a normal person can't naturally use them, unless the person using them wasn't built to normal height. Same year, different location. A French team documents structures in Morocco, ancient kasbahs, fortified granaries, buildings locales attribute to those who came before the Berbers. The expedition photographer notes something that isn't a story or a rumor. It's wear, physical evidence etched into stone by repeated use. The door frames show two distinct wear patterns. The lower pattern, at approximately 170 centimeters, is shallow, occasional contact. The upper pattern, at 260 centimeters, is deep, constant use, as if the primary occupant stood nearly a meter taller than secondary users. Two patterns, two heights, two groups of users, one written directly into the doorway by centuries of bodies passing through, one missing from the history books. Now look at the thresholds: Ani, Samarkand, Persepolis, and more sites than I can list in a single breath. Expedition teams didn't just measure door heights, they measured the thresholds too, the stone sills at the base of doorways, the part you step over, the part you feel in your legs every single time you cross. A standard threshold is about 5 to 10 centimeters high, just enough to hold off drafts, water, and grit. But in these sites, the measured thresholds aren't 5 to 10, they're 25 to 40 centimeters, high enough that a normal person has to step over them deliberately, not once, not as a special entryway. Through door after door, day after day, room after room. Impractical, exhausting, absurd, unless your stride was longer, unless your legs were built for a higher step, unless that threshold height was comfortable for someone else. An Ottoman surveyor wrote in 1871, "The threshold heights present a daily inconvenience no rational builder would impose upon himself. One must conclude either extraordinary incompetence or accommodation for users of unusual physical proportion." Accommodation. He wouldn't say it plainly, he couldn't. But he understood what the stone was saying. These buildings weren't accidents. They weren't just for show. They weren't decorative exaggerations built only to impress outsiders. They were functional, practical, designed for daily movement and routine use. And the design points toward bodies larger than ours. Here's the detail that haunts me. Several expeditions noted the floors, in high traffic, areas, hallways, main chambers, entrances. The stone was worn smooth, polished by centuries of footsteps. But the wear wasn't even. It was deeper in certain spots, spaced at regular intervals, like an invisible pattern stamped into the ground. The spacing was measured at roughly 140 to 160 centimeters. A typical human stride is roughly 70 to 80 centimeters. These floor patterns suggest a stride nearly double that length. Not a sprint, not a leap. A normal daily walking rhythm, just for someone with longer legs and a longer reach. The buildings remember. The stones recorded every passage, every routine, every ordinary crossing through an ordinary doorway. And the occupants who made those marks were not our size. In the next chapter, we move beyond structure and into sound. Because the expeditions found something else inside these places. Chambers that hummed, spaces that amplified, bells with strange properties, and interior geometry that looks designed for more than shelter. Architecture meant not only to hold a roof over a head, but to resonate. Stone shelters, wood insulates, metal conducts. But some materials do something else. They resonate. And again, the expeditions kept running into spaces that seemed built for exactly that purpose. Not just to stand, but to vibrate. Not just to echo, but to tune. Ekmiadzin, Armenia, 1879. A Russian acoustical engineer accompanies an archaeological survey. His task sounds harmless. Document the sonic properties of ancient churches. Standard academic work. The kind of assignment that's supposed to produce neat notes and quiet conclusions. But his report contains a passage that doesn't read like routine science at all. The central chamber produces a sustained tone when any sound exceeds moderate volume. The resonance occurs at approximately 112 Hz. a frequency I have not encountered in natural acoustic spaces. The effect is unsettling. Several team members reported physical discomfort. 112 hertz. That isn't a poetic description. That's a number, a target. The kind of frequency you don't accidentally hit if you're stacking stones at random. He continues. The chamber walls contain hollow cavities sealed with plaster. When I requested permission to examine their contents, I was informed the church authorities prohibited such inquiry. No explanation was given. Sealed cavities, a direct request, a clear denial, no explanation. So, what exactly was inside those walls that no one was allowed to see? Same year, different empire. A British expedition in Rajasthan documents a temple complex. The central structure holds a bell, massive bronze, suspended high in a tower like the heart of the building. The expedition metallurgist examines it and writes, "The alloy composition is unlike any I have encountered. Copper and tin, yes, but also trace elements I cannot identify without laboratory analysis. The bell produces not one tone, but 3 simultaneous frequencies. The effect on the listener is profound and immediate. 3 frequencies, at the same time, from a single bell. That isn't crude metalwork, that's precision, that's control. The kind of control you only get when someone understands exactly how sound behaves inside a shape. He asks to take a sample, denied. He asks to photograph the bell's interior, denied. And then, 3 months later, the bell is removed. The official reason given is simple and convenient, structural instability of the tower. But the tower still stands today, which raises the obvious question. If the tower was truly unstable, why did the structure survive while the bell vanished? Now listen to what they found beneath the domes. Multiple expeditions, Russian, French, German, documented the same phenomenon across Central Asia and the Caucasus. Large domed structures contain secondary chambers beneath the main floor, not basements, not crypts, not storage rooms, acoustic chambers. One French engineer wrote in 1891, "The subterranean space acts as a resonating cavity. Sound produced in the upper chamber is amplified and transformed below. The resulting tone can be felt in the bones before it reaches the ears." I do not know how to explain this without suggesting intentional design of considerable sophistication. Felt in the bones. That line matters because it points to something deeper than good acoustics. It suggests these spaces weren't meant only to be heard. They were meant to be experienced physically, through the body, not just through the ear. And at that point, the buildings stop looking like simple places of worship or administration. They start looking like instruments, structures designed to produce specific frequencies, bells engineered to generate multiple tones at once, chambers built to amplify and reshape sound into something you don't merely listen to, you feel. So why? One Russian report from 1884 contains a single speculative sentence, later crossed out but still legible. If such technology were developed further, one might imagine effects upon human cognition, emotion, or even physical health. Effects on cognition, on emotion, on health, he wrote it. Then he struck it out. Because that's not the kind of thought you publish if you want to stay respectable. Not if you want funding. Not if you want to keep your position and be invited on the next expedition instead of quietly removed from it. The expeditions found technology, not magic, not folklore. Engineering that was advanced enough and unsettling enough that it was safer to label it ritual than to describe it as a system. In the next chapter, we follow the objects themselves, the bells, the bronze instruments, the artifacts the expeditions crated up and shipped back to museums. Where are they now? The answer is troubling. Most of them are gone. Didn't just find ruins and write reports. They found objects. They tagged them, weighed them, packed them into crates, and shipped them home. So, where are they now? I started where the truth usually hides in plain sight. Inventory logs. Museum records from the 1880s and 1890s. Accession numbers, weights, dimensions. Short descriptions written by people who assumed the future would never question them. The objects existed. The paperwork proves it. Berlin. 1883. The Natural History Museum receives a shipment from a Central Asian expedition. The inventory lists bronze fragment, 47 kilograms, circular, origin uncertain, acoustic properties noted. 47 kilograms of bronze, with acoustic properties. From an expedition that officially found nothing unusual. Current status in later paperwork. Transferred to secondary storage, 1919. Location unknown, not destroyed. Not lost in a fire, not war damage, just location unknown. Vienna, 1891. The Imperial Collection receives materials from a Caucasus survey. Item 847. Bell fragment, incomplete, unusual alloy composition. Emits tone when struck. Further analysis recommended. Current status. Reclassified, 1924. Removed from public catalog. Reclassified, removed, London. 1886. The British Museum accessions objects from an Indian expedition, among them, stone tablet, 23 kilograms, inscribed with unknown script and symbols, possibly astronomical. Current status, not for display, restricted study access only. Restricted access for a stone tablet. And it wasn't just these three. I found the same pattern repeated across 11 museums in Europe. Objects received, objects cataloged, objects quietly removed from the path of ordinary researchers. Not smashed, not buried, not officially destroyed, just moved into restricted collections, into secondary storage, into reclassified archives. The descriptions survive, the weights survive, the accession numbers survive, but the objects themselves, what you can touch, test, photograph, and verify, are gone. Then I found a letter that made the pattern feel less like bureaucracy and more like control. A curator's letter from 1927 mentions, "The Commission has again requested transfer of Lot 12 materials to the central repository. I have complied, though I confess uncertainty regarding the legal authority for such requests. The Commission, the central repository, the same unnamed body, the same quiet hand moving pieces off the table. And here's what troubles me most. Some of these objects have full descriptions, detailed measurements, careful notes, even photographs and early catalogs. So, when modern researchers request access, they don't always get told it's missing. They get told something colder. Item not available for study. Not missing, not destroyed, not misplaced, not available. Which implies the museums know exactly where the objects are. They simply won't show them. 73 items from the expeditions I traced. Bells, tablets, bronze fragments, and tools described as unusually large. 49 are listed as restricted, reclassified, or location unknown. That isn't a natural loss rate. That's a process. The evidence didn't vanish by accident. It was collected, preserved, labeled, and stored, and then quietly removed from public view. And in the next chapter, something breaks. A key archive shuts down access. A photograph is suddenly declared a forgery. Pages that survived more than a century go missing overnight. The pattern shifts, and not in our favor. For 10 chapters, we've been assembling pieces, documents, photographs, measurements, objects, and then someone notices. Munich, 2019. A researcher requests access to the Ottoman survey collection, the folders with the symbol, the same documents I mentioned earlier. The archive responds with a single line. Collection under review. Access suspended indefinitely. Under review. After more than 150 years of availability. The researcher asks for clarification. When will the review be complete? What triggered it? No response. Vienna, 2021. The glass plate negatives from the Samarkand expedition, the ones labeled 1882, the ones tied to the shadow photograph, are suddenly delisted from the catalog. A librarian offers an explanation that sounds technical enough to end the conversation. The plates were reassessed. Several were determined to be later reproductions, not original materials. They have been removed pending authentication. Authentication. For plates that sat in the same collection for roughly 140 years, without question. And the timing is hard to ignore. In 2018, a documentary researcher filed requests for those exact plates. In 2019, an independent historian published an article mentioning the shadow anomaly. By 2021, the plates were gone. London, 2022. A private collector attempts to donate expedition journals to a university archive. The journals contain margin notes about unusual measurements, sketches of oversized doorways, the kind of primary source material most institutions claim to want. The university declines the donation. The official reason: the materials do not align with current collection priorities. A 150-year-old expedition journal, a primary source, declined. The collector offers them to 2 other institutions. Both decline. The journals remain in private hands, unseen, unstudied, and conveniently outside any public catalog. And this is what happens when you get too close. One researcher I contacted, I won't name them, spent 3 years gathering expedition data from European archives, measurements, photographs, correspondence. In 2020, they prepared a paper connecting the dimensional patterns across multiple sites. Before submission, they received an email from their department head. It has been suggested that your current research direction may not reflect well on the institution. Consider redirecting your focus. Suggested. By whom? They withdrew the paper, changed their research topic, stopped responding to my emails. So the files aren't just closed, they're closing. Documents that survived wars, revolutions, and regime changes are suddenly unavailable. Photographs that sat in archives for more than a century are suddenly forgeries. Researchers who ask the wrong questions are suddenly encouraged to stop asking. We almost assembled the full picture, and then someone decided that was enough. In the next chapter, we stop, we breathe. We ask a simple question: what do we actually know? What can we prove? And what remains only suspicion? The silence after the noise. We've been moving fast, across continents, across centuries, across archives and private collections and restricted folders. Now we stop. Because before we go any further, we have to be honest about what we actually have in our hands. Not what we feel, not what we suspect, what we can point to. What do we know for certain? We know that 19th century expeditions measured architectural anomalies. Doorways that are too tall, stairs that are too steep, corridors that are too wide. The figures are written into reports, multiple teams, multiple empires, consistent ranges repeated across sites. That's documented. We know that expedition members recorded private observations they kept out of official reports. Handprints too large, wear patterns at unusual heights, practical structures whose proportions didn't match the people living nearby. That's documented too. We know that photographs exist showing shadows that don't match the people inside the frame. And we know that some of those photographs were later removed, reclassified, or suddenly declared forgeries, often long after they entered collections and sat there unquestioned. We know that objects were cataloged, packed, shipped to museums, and then quietly vanished into restricted storage or unknown locations. We know that the same symbol appears on materials tied to different empires and different decades, suggesting coordination that shouldn't exist, at least not on paper. We know that researchers who pursue these questions keep hitting closed doors, access suspended, catalogs altered, professional pressure applied behind polite language. All of this is documented, traceable, verifiable. But here's what we do not know. We do not know who built those structures. We have measurements, not builders. We do not know what the shadows in those photographs actually represent. We have anomalies, not identities. We do not know what the missing objects truly were or why they were pulled out of sight. We have inventory descriptions, not the items themselves. We do not know who belongs to the commission, what it is, or what authority it holds. We have references, not names. We have evidence that something was hidden. We don't have final proof of what exactly is being hidden. And that's the hardest part, because the pattern is undeniable. Something happened, something was found, something was systematically pushed out of view. But the core, the thing itself, always stays just out of reach. This is what it feels like to research a topic someone doesn't want researched. You don't find the center, you find the edges, outlines, gaps, shadows of shadows. And the frustration isn't just a side effect, it becomes part of the mechanism. If you can't prove the central claim, everything else gets dismissed with easy labels, speculation, conspiracy, fantasy. Even when the numbers match, even when the documents exist, even when the pattern practically screams from the page. So, where does that leave us? In the next chapter, we return to what can't be reclassified, transferred, or declared a forgery, the stone itself. Because buildings don't lie, and some of them are still standing. Documents can be burned, photographs can be misplaced, objects can vanish into restricted collections. But stone remains. You can't reclassify a doorway. You can't transfer a staircase into secondary storage. You can't declare a building a forgery and make the stone disappear. The architecture is still there. Quiet, exposed, waiting to be measured again. Ani, Eastern Turkey. The abandoned city still stands. The same doorways the Russian team measured in 1892 are still there. Anyone with a tape measure can verify the dimensions. 280 centimeters. 200. 90, 300. The numbers haven't changed in 130 years. They won't change tomorrow. Samarkand, Uzbekistan. The Registan complex, the madrasas and mosques the expeditions documented, the thresholds they described as impractically high, they're still there, still measurable, still roughly 30 to 40 centimeters tall. Thousands of tourists walk through every year. Most step over those thresholds without thinking, without stopping to ask why a builder would design an obstacle you have to lift your leg over, again and again, through door after door, if the building was meant for daily use. But the stone keeps the question even when visitors don't. Petra, Jordan, the treasury, the monastery. Doorways carved directly into cliff faces, dwarfing the humans who pose beneath them for photographs. Guides explain it the same way, almost everywhere. Ceremonial grandeur, status symbols, impressive facades. But the interior passages tell a story. Functional spaces, daily use layouts, storage rooms, corridors, side chambers, places built for movement and routine, not just spectacle. And those spaces carry the same proportions, the same unusual heights. Grandeur doesn't explain a storage room with a 9-foot door. Here's what matters. Those expedition measurements weren't fantasies. They weren't clerical errors. They weren't exaggerations by excitable explorers. The buildings exist. The dimensions are real. Anyone can verify them. And yet mainstream archaeology often explains them away with familiar words: ventilation, acoustics, symbolic importance, cultural preference. Explanations that ask us to believe dozens of unconnected civilizations all independently decided to build impractical doorways, uncomfortable stairs, and inexplicably wide corridors. For centuries, for thousands of years, across 3 continents. By coincidence. The alternative explanation is simpler and more disturbing. These buildings were practical, they were functional, they were meant to be used every day, just not by bodies shaped like ours, by someone we're not supposed to remember. The stone doesn't care about official explanations. It doesn't read journals. It doesn't follow institutional rules. It doesn't adjust itself to fit a theory. The stone just sits there, measurable, undeniable, patient, waiting for someone to ask the obvious question. In the next chapter, we zoom out, because the pattern isn't limited to one corridor or one empire. It spans continents. And when you map the anomalies together, something starts to emerge, a global footprint. One site can be dismissed as an anomaly, 2 can be waved off as coincidence, 3 start to raise questions. But dozens of sites across multiple continents spanning thousands of years, that's a pattern no one wants to name out loud. So I mapped them. Every location mentioned in the expedition reports, every site with doorways exceeding 250 centimeters, every staircase with risers above 35 centimeters, every corridor wide enough for figures we're told never existed. The map filled up faster than I expected. Turkey, Armenia, Georgia, Iran, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, India, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, Peru, Bolivia, Mexico. Different cultures, different languages, different religions, different centuries, same measurements. And it isn't just a vague, similar vibe. The doorway heights in Ani match the doorway heights in Petra. The stair risers in Samarkand match what was recorded at Ollantaytambo. The corridor widths in Persepolis match what surveyors noted. At Tiwanaku, not approximately, not close enough, within centimeters. One expedition member noticed this as early as 1889. a German surveyor who had worked in both Central Asia and South America. His private journal contains a single entry that reads like a man trying not to think too hard. The proportions in Puma Punku disturb me. They are identical to what I measured in Samarkand. I cannot account for this. I do not wish to account for this. Identical proportions. Opposite sides of the world. Civilizations with no confirmed contact, he noticed. He wrote it down, and then he kept it private. So, what does the global pattern suggest? Either every ancient civilization independently invented the same impractical architectural standards, the same door heights, the same stair dimensions, the same corridor widths, over and over, for reasons that were purely symbolic. Or there was a standard, a shared measurement system, a common reference, a template that spread across continents before the written record catches up, a template built to a scale that does not match us. The mainstream explanation requires an endless stack of coincidences, cultural preferences that magically align, independent innovations that land on the same numbers, unrelated builders repeating the same impractical choices for thousands of years. The alternative requires one assumption, simple but heavy, that someone was here before, someone who built to their own scale, someone whose structures we inherited, moved into, repaired, reused, and eventually claimed as our own. We didn't build these places, we occupied them. And then we forgot, or we were made to forget, who built them first. The expedition teams felt that pressure. The numbers forced their eyes open, but their careers forced their mouths shut. So they left hints instead of statements, marginal notes instead of conclusions, private letters instead of publications. And they hoped someone, and someday, would read between the lines. In the next chapter, we ask the final question. If this was hidden, who hid it, and why? The answers may be more uncomfortable than the mystery itself. We've established the pattern, the measurements, the documents, the global footprint. Now comes the uncomfortable question. If the expeditions found evidence of something extraordinary, why hide it? And who benefits from erasing an entire layer of history? I don't have final proof, but I do have theories, and they're simpler than you might expect. Theory 1. It's easier to delete than to rewrite. Imagine you're a 19th century academic. You've spent your career building a framework of human history. Civilizations rise and fall in neat sequences. Progress moves in one direction. The narrative is clean, orderly, and, most importantly, publishable. Then an expedition returns with numbers that don't fit. Doorways too tall, stairs too steep. Wear patterns in stone that suggest daily use by bodies that don't match the local population. Evidence of builders who shouldn't exist. What do? You could rewrite every textbook, challenge every assumption, admit that the foundation is cracked and the timeline might be wrong, or you could lose a few pages, reclassify a few objects, label the anomalies ceremonial, symbolic, or aesthetic, and keep the machine running. One path destroys careers, the other preserves them. So, the choice, especially for institutions, was easy. Theory 2, knowledge is power. Some information isn't hidden because it's dangerous. It's hidden because it's valuable. If ancient structures contained acoustic technology we still don't understand, that isn't just a curiosity. That's a resource. If there's a lost science encoded in bronze alloys, resonant chambers, and tuned architecture, that isn't something you casually leave in public view. You control it, you restrict it, you study it. Quietly, with limited access, behind locked doors and polite phrases. The commission wouldn't erase evidence because it was worthless. They would erase it because someone wanted exclusive access. Knowledge hidden is not knowledge destroyed. It's knowledge monopolized. Theory 3, fear. Not fear of the objects themselves. Fear of what they imply. If the buildings weren't built by ordinary humans, who built them? If there was a previous civilization built on a different scale, where did it go? If they were here for centuries or longer, why aren't they here now? Some questions are easier not to ask. Some answers are easier not to face. Because once you accept even the possibility, the clean story of human history stops being clean. The timeline stops being safe. The world stops feeling settled. The expeditions touch something old. Something that suggested the story we tell ourselves is missing a chapter. And someone decided that suggestion was too dangerous to spread. Not because it was false, but because it might be true. Here's what I believe. The cover-up wasn't one dramatic decision made in a single room. It was 1,000 small decisions. Archivists following policy, curators avoiding controversy, academics choosing safer topics, institutions protecting reputations. No grand movie villain conspiracy. Just ordinary caution, repeated across generations until it becomes a wall. The hints survived because hiding everything was impossible. The hard facts disappeared because hiding them was easy. And now, in the final chapter, we step back. We look at what remains, what questions still hang in the air, and what you should do if you ever find an old photograph where the shadow doesn't match. We've reached the end, but not a conclusion. Because this story doesn't end with a neat answer. Not yet. So, let me be clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying giants walked the earth. I'm not saying I have definitive proof of a lost civilization. I'm not saying the history books are entirely wrong. What I'm saying is simpler and harder to brush aside. There are traces. Architectural traces. Doorways that don't match normal human proportions. Stairs built for a different stride. Wear patterns polished into stone at heights that make no sense. Unless someone taller moved through those passages every day. The measurements exist. The stones exist. Anyone can verify them. There are hints. Expedition journals filled with careful coded language. Observations that never made it into official reports. Private letters describing details their authors refused to publish under their own names. The documents exist, the archives exist, and some of them are still accessible, for now. There are holes, missing pages, reclassified objects. Photographs suddenly declared forgeries after a century of quiet acceptance. Researchers steered away from certain questions with soft words that carry hard consequences. The pattern of suppression exists. The coordination exists. The symbol exists. None of this proves what the expedition members thought they were looking at, but it does prove they saw something. Something consistent, something unsettling, something significant enough that people later tried to reduce it to hints and fragments. And that brings us to the question that remains. Not, were there giants? That question is too easy to mock, too easy to dismiss with a laugh and a shrug. The real question is this. Why did trained surveyors, across multiple empires, record the same anomalies and then deliberately blur their own findings? Why do museums hold objects they won't display? Why do archives close access to materials that survived 150 years of wars, revolutions, and regime changes? Why does the act of asking make institutions uncomfortable? If there's nothing to hide, then hiding should be unnecessary. Here's what I want you to remember. Next time you visit an old city, Ani, Petra, Samarkand, anywhere the stone is ancient, look at the doorways. Really look, stand beneath them, feel the scale. Notice how small you become without anyone saying a word. Then ask yourself the simplest question in the world. Who was this built for? And if you ever come across an old photograph, an estate sale, an antique shop, a forgotten family album, don't just look at faces, look at the shadows. Check if they match the bodies in the frame, and if they don't, look closer. Because the expedition teams left us hints when they couldn't leave us facts. They wrote carefully, they trimmed sentences, they avoided names, they kept the sharpest details out of public reports. They were hoping that someone, someday, would assemble the pieces anyway. We've assembled what we can. The rest is still out there, inside restricted archives, locked museum storage, private collections, and buildings no one has measured since the 19th century. The question isn't whether the past holds secrets. The question is whether we're brave enough to keep looking.